In 1959, Chevrolet released America's first air-cooled rear-engine car. It was hailed as most profoundly revolutionary. It became the first car to appear on the front cover of Time magazine, October 1959, and Motor Trend named it the 1960 Car of the Year. Only a few years later, it would be called the most dangerous car in America. Chevrolet had removed the part to cut costs. This allegedly caused the car to roll over. The cost of this part less than $20. The cost savings would prove negligible compared to the lives affected, damage to Chevy's image, and impact on American car industry forever. Today we're looking at the Chevrolet Corvair, from controversy to cult classic, and the truth with everything in between. It's the 1950s. The big three American car makers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, are producing just one size of passenger cars, large, because consumers prioritize families and comfort, and oil prices are cheap. But European imports are gaining ground on U.S. soil. Sales of compact cars from Volkswagen, Renault, and Fiat indicate an American demand for smaller and cheaper cars. The big three realize many American families are on a budget, are looking for a second car that's more affordable. So Ford and Chrysler take a standard approach. Instead of designing new cars, they just scale down their cars into compact versions. The compact cars have a 20% smaller body and use a 4 or 6-cylinder engine rather than a V8. But General Motors does something different. Here's why. This is Ed Cole, chief engineer at GM's Chevrolet division. After World War II, he had been involved with an experimental rear-engine Cadillac. Project got shelved, but Cole kept his interest in rear-engine cars, and he especially loved the air-cooled compact cars from Europe. Soon, Cole became general manager at Chevrolet and VP of General Motors. This is 1956. The market is ripe for Chevy to pursue the compact car market, so Cole jumps on the opportunity to develop a compact prototype. At first, GM as a company resists the compact concept, but the economic recession of 1957 to 58 happens. Finally, GM accepts the fact that more consumers are looking for affordable compact cars. GM changes its mind and gives Cole the green light to produce a compact prototype. The goal is to design a compact car that weighs 1,332 pounds less than a standard 1960 Chevy. That's 1/3 of the weight. And they want to sell it for $200 less than the standard. To make the car smaller and lighter without compromising stylish proportions, the engineers realized they can't just shorten the wheelbase and the front and rear overhang. Instead, they need to remove the floor hump of the drive shaft to lower the overall height while accommodating 6 passengers. The engineers look at different European cars. Then they decide the best and most aesthetically pleasing option is to use a rear-engine, rear-wheel drive design. The result is a Chevrolet Corvair. It's priced less than $2,000, which is half the annual income of an average American. In fact, it's the cheapest car Chevy has ever made. It attracts young families, housewives, and less experienced drivers. In its first year, Chevy sells over 200,000 Corvairs. It would eventually sell over 1.1 million of its first-generation models. But it's not just its compact size and low price. For Americans, the Corvair is novel, from interior to exterior. This is the first American car with a rear engine. Also, the first American air-cooled flat engine. It doesn't need a water radiator. The engine itself is modeled after a Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle of course, but instead of a flat 4 engine like in the Beetle, the Corvair comes equipped with a flat 6. It's non-standard for an American car, and more similar with European cars. The Corvair comes with a frunk, which is a front trunk. It also has a swing axle rear suspension, non-conventional chassis, wider wheels, and fuel economy of 20 to 25 miles per gallon. Contrast that with a Chevy Impala, which has a fuel economy of 15 miles a gallon, and you can see why Corvair is economically appealing. The Corvair also has an unconventional exterior design because it doesn't have tail fins or front chrome grille. Because remember, the engine's in the back, so it's radically different from competing compact cars like Ford Falcon and Chrysler Valiant. That's why critics call the Corvair revolutionary, and the Corvair wins many design awards. The first generation Corvair lasts from 1960 to 1964. Because of the initial popularity of the Corvair sedan, Chevy makes the Corvair available in other trims, including the Monza Coupe, the Lakewood station wagon, the Greenbrier van, and the Greenbrier loadside pickup truck. In 1962, it becomes the first production car to offer a turbocharged engine as a $300 option, able to produce 150 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque, which is impressive for a relatively small engine back in 1962. The Corvair achieves respectable sales, and the world looks rosy till 1964. 1965. Then, a book titled Unsafe at Any Speed gets released. Its author is a young Harvard-educated attorney named Ralph Nader. He targets the early Corvair models as a one-car accident waiting to happen, and he attributes the Corvair's engineering flaws and lack of safety concerns as the main cause. The book opens with the account of Mrs. Rose Pierny. She's driving her Corvair on Hollister Street in Santa Barbara, California. John Bortolzo, a police officer who happens to be driving the opposite direction, witnesses her car suddenly swerve to sharp left and flip over. Two other men rush to help Mrs. Pierny. Mrs. Pierny sits dazed and numb in shock, but she managed to say calmly, "Something went wrong with my steering." But that's not the only thing that's gone wrong, for nearby is their severed arm, still with their wristwatch on the wedding ring on it. Here's the sad kicker. She was driving at the posted speed limit, a mere 35 miles an hour. The ambulance takes Mrs. Pierny away. Officer Bortozzo checks the scene. He observes that the left rear tire is flat and deflated. He also notices that the road gouge marks made by the metal rim of the tire. Later in court, he gives the opinion that the engineering behind the Corvair caused it to swerve out of control and flip over, just like other Corvair accidents he has investigated in the past. General Motors settles out of court and pays Mrs. Pierny $70,000 rather than continue the trial. And that's how Nader's book opens. The book criticizes the Corvair for its strong tendency to oversteer and flip over. Oversteering happens, for example, if you're making a right turn, but the car turns more to the right than you anticipate. A skillful driver knows to let up on the steering wheel to correct an oversteering break. But here's the problem. For the previous 3 decades up to this time, conventional cars in America typically understeered. So the average American is used to overcorrecting and compensating for it. So now imagine what the average driver does now that he or she has a car that is inherently oversteering. We're talking disaster. Critics attribute the Corvair's unique handling characteristics to several key factors. First off, the Corvair is the heaviest rear-engine car in the Western world. More than 60% of its weight is in the rear and 40% in the front. That's not even accounting for any passengers. The uneven weight distribution alone requires skillful driving. Otherwise, it can cause poor handling and increase the chances of sliding. But the average American at the time isn't used to driving rear-engine cars. They're more accustomed to front-engine cars, so they don't take into account the Corvair's different handling characteristics. To compensate for its strong oversteering tendency, GM recommends car owners to maintain critical tire pressure levels. Specifically, the front tire is at 15 psi and the rear at 26 psi when cold, or 18 psi and 30 psi when hot. GM lays the burden of responsibility on the car owner. The problem is that the recommended tire pressure is not in line with existing industry standards, and they aren't easy to remember. Besides, tire pressures aren't regulated or enforced, and the average car owner isn't always aware of the importance of maintaining the recommended levels. But it's not just the uneven weight distribution. The Corvair's suspension design gets a lot of heat for also causing oversteering. Here's what I mean. Most cars at the time used a front-engine, rear-drive configuration with a conventional solid axle at the rear. With this setup, the rear wheels remain perpendicular to the ground. In contrast, early Corvair models use a swing axle independent suspension system similar to the Renault Dauphine and the Volkswagen Beetle. This setup eliminates universal joints at the wheels and keeps the rear wheels perpendicular to the drive shafts. So the rear tires face large camber angle changes when the car takes a corner. This decreases the tire contact with the road surface and leads to loss of rear wheel grip and oversteer. Initially, the Corvair was supposed to come equipped with a front anti-roll bar to address the handling issues. The bar transfers the weight to the front outboard tire, reduces the rear slip angles, and avoids oversteer. But at the last minute, just before production, GM modifies the design to cut costs and removes the anti-roll bar. Evidently, the Corvair's rear weight bias and swing axle setup are a dangerous combination. Together, it leads the car's rear to start swinging outward when cornering. Also, the rear tires tuck under and the weight transfer places tires at odd angles relative to the pavement. The angles are significant enough to cause the car to oversteer with an aggravated lift, and then the car rolls over. General Motors ends up facing more than 100 liability lawsuits, but GM denies mechanical fault and blames the accidents on driver error or road condition. By the time Nader's infamous book gets released, Chevy has already addressed the problem on newer models. For example, the 1964 Corvair is fitted with an anti-roll bar between the front wheels, the standard equipment, and also a camber compensating single-leaf transverse spring between the rear wheels to limit camber change. For the 1965 Corvair, Chevy replaces the swing axle suspension with a fully independent suspension suspension system and 2 lateral stabilizer rods in the rear. But by then, the damage to GM's reputation was already done. At the time, car crashes are the leading cause of death in Americans younger than 45 years of age. So the book catches public attention. Bad press gives the Corvair a notorious reputation. But the book does more than kill the Corvair. It leads Congress to enact the landmark National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Act. Also, President Lyndon B. Johnson creates the Department of Transportation in 1966. Its purpose? To regulate the car industry and maintain safety standards in the brakes, tires, seat belts, and eventually airbags, padded dash panels, and so forth. So what happened to the Corvair? Corvair sales are already dropping due to the release of the Ford Mustang in 1964. A Nader's book helps drive the last nail on the Corvair coffin. The year after the book comes out, Corvair sales drop by more than half, down to 110,000 in 1966. Compare that to Mustang sales, which hit almost 608,000. Shortly after, Chevrolet releases the Camaro, which is also well received, and Corvair sales continued in those days, reaching 27,000 in 1967, and then down to a mere 6,000 in 1969. That year, Chevy pulls the plug on the Corvair. But in 1972, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration issues a surprising report. It concludes that the Corvair isn't more unsafe than other cars on the road at that time. NHTSA states that the videos that critics used to demonstrate the Corvair's instability were not a valid evaluation of the handling characteristics of a 1960 Corvair. The footage shows tests being done between a Ford Falcon and a Chevy Corvair on a circular track with a center radius of 150 feet. Tire pressures on both cars were varied for different phases of the test. In all phases, Corvair always followed the Falcon, and the Corvair continued to spin out. NHTSA observes that the Corvair driver intentionally turned the wheel to the inside of the center radius to make the Corvair skid and appear more unstable than the Ford. It further states that the Falcon had a clear advantage since it was always in front of the Corvair, and the previous skid marks on the road meant that they had evidently done some practice runs prior to filming. Corvair fans to this day believe that the tests were rigged to make the Corvair look bad. They always note that the test was performed and filmed by the Ford Motor Company. On the contrary, they say that Corvair's engineering was genius, it had superior handling, and that it was fun to drive. But now you tell me, have you ever driven a Chevy Corvair or know someone who has? Do you think its engineering is inherently bad, or do you give weight to NHTSA's report that redeems it? Please share your opinion by commenting below. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.